On this episode of the podcast, I have on with me Peter Swartz. He's the Chief Science Officer and co-founder at Altana. We're going to be talking about his background, moving into the AI ML space, how his background has shaped his leadership perspective as well. He's moved from a CTO to a Chief Science Officer. We're going to touch on that as well. And also, how do you balance that general tech knowledge with a deeper expertise in data science and ML? Peter, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. If you could tell everyone what you guys do at Altana.
So Altana is a value chain management system, a system to understand and manage everything from the extraction of raw materials to the distribution of the final goods and everything in between for production on the planet. We're based on an underlying map of global supply chains that incorporates billions of records, hundreds of millions of companies, and is constructed and analyzed with cutting edge, and I might say very exciting, machine learning and AI.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like lots of moving parts and obviously growing industry, growing company. We're going to dive into a little bit about your journey, a little bit about the path you took, and obviously we're going to put your LinkedIn profile in so people can, we're not going to go through the bio now, but we'll touch on it. They can get into the details on your LinkedIn as well. I guess as you have moved through your career and you have been transitioning from, a civil engineering and quantitative political science background into the AI and ML space, maybe talk to us about how some of those early underpinnings kind of gave you an opportunity to move into these more technical roles now.
So I've always been interested in complex systems and having impact at a national or global scale. I grew up in DC, and which gave me that sort of global exposure. And I, both my mother and my grandfather studied and worked in civil engineering. And as a result, I thought that would be one way, working on a large scale infrastructure to have an impact. At the same time, because of this DC exposure, I became very interested in political science, especially, I would say, quantitative social science, as well as a focus on international trade or relations. I was really, really lucky to actually find some of the quantitative modeling sides of civil engineering. So I really got into transportation engineering, which looked like a lot of parametric modeling, discrete choice models, agent-based modeling, operations research, et cetera. And then again, on the quantitative political science side, was able to get a good background in probability and statistics, a lot of that econometrics, et cetera. This was I think an exciting background. I was sort of like, how do I combine my interests? How do I do this? Like I said, I thought about actually working in global infrastructure. I actually, in undergrad, interned on a pipeline in South India, which is funny because it sort of presaged in some ways my work in global value chains, because I was actually in a textile bleaching and dyeing town, and I considered going to work in Central Africa after school on massive infrastructure projects. But I was really in love with this, I would say, the modeling side of the house. And I was so lucky to find global supply chains and global trade. And the first job that I got out of grad school was working at Panjiva first, which was effectively a Bloomberg for global trade. It's like a market intelligence platform. And I came on as the first data scientist and then head of data science there, and was able to really build out my engineering and AI and machine learning skills on that basis that I'd already had. I had this basis, which I'm frankly continue to be grateful for, in probability and statistics and parametric modeling, which for me is evergreen in the sense that, it's all the fundamentals of assessing a model, regardless of what type of model, whether that's deep learning, whether that's, an old school linear regression. And then working in industry, in the tech industry at Panjiva, I was then able to build up my skill in both non-parametric modeling, so getting to work on things like deep learning, et cetera, but also just straight up engineering, frankly, where I was working with great computer scientists and engineers who just gave me tons of feedback. And because we were quite a small company, I got all this time to work on data engineering, machine learning engineering, actually having to implement the things that I was coming up with and deploy them. And this was just a great experience. I continue to be grateful for it. We sold Panjiva to S&P Global in 2018. And then with two good friends and alumni from that space, Evan Smith, from Panjiva, Evan Smith and Raf Taranian, and Evan's actually a roommate of mine from undergrad at Yale. And so I've actually known him for more than half my life at this point. So it was a pleasure to work with him there, and then really get to know Raf and grow this relationship there. We went and started Altana, and I talked about this earlier, but this vision of having a value chain management system based on an underlying map of the global supply chain was driven by a belief that has been borne out that globalization would not persist in its current form, that geopolitics and climate change and a variety of other reasons would disrupt the existing cross-border and domestic production of goods. And that as a result, everyone would need a map of the supply chain and a way to then manage it at scale, to sort of see what was happening across billions of records, across hundreds of millions of companies, to then focus upon what was important and then act in a platform to manage that. And this focus upon both having a knowledge graph and then generating insight really also then started to expose me to other ideas around federated learning and other types of federated systems. We believed that to construct such a map, commercial data would not be enough, and that in fact you would need to have federated systems that could share intelligence without sharing raw data. And so whether that's federated systems, federated learning, federated knowledge graphs, transfer learning, et cetera, that there would be really opportunity to apply a lot of these techniques that were being applied in like the Internet of Things space into the global physical economy. And that was sort of our path. And so, we started that at the end of 2018. And then, it's been a real journey since. I think I've talked enough about sort of some of the problems here, but I'll say that one of the things that's such a pleasure about this work is one, the impact, and we'll go to this. I know we're going to talk about sort of my sort of view on leadership and impact and things like that in a bit. But, what are we trying to do at Altana? We're trying to fix globalization and really build out collaborative, resilient, secure, and sustainable value chains that can at scale solve many of the issues that are in the current existing physical economy where there's, frankly, a lot of problems. And then whether it's sort of compliance, procurement, resiliency, economic security, you'd be able to act at scale. So it's like, oh, here's a new form of insurance where you can insure at a higher maximum disruption of the value chains. Here's a new way to understand and then stop forced labor goods from entering into your supply chain or help stop them from entering the US. We're proud to support, for example, CBP in that capacity. And then from the technical side, it just keeps building, which has been such a pleasure where, you want to constructing knowledge graphs and understanding what's happening at scale has been one of the theses of my career, but then generating insight upon it, like graph models, graph learning, network analysis, fusing that with NLP. It's just been such a pleasure because the problems don't stop. You're like, oh my gosh, I've got data in English, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, Russian, Ukrainian, like Vietnamese, I don't know. It's like every language. And you're like, how am I going to then use that? And then how am I going to build these multilingual systems, these graph systems, and how am I going to generate insight in a world where I can observe a lot, but not everything? So that's my journey. And I would say it's a continuing journey.
Yeah. You said something that I was just thinking about, obviously civil engineering, political science, working on building solutions for big problems, obviously seeing things on a global perspective. It kind of seems like it's not by accident that global supply chain is the focus of the company. And, as complicated as the space is and as many moving parts, when you look at things on a global perspective, the number of variables, the number of attributes, obviously, you talked about, just data points, different language. All these different things kind of add up. Do you think with your background of how you saw the world from a political perspective and how you looked at and modeled data from that angle, was that part of this solution because you are seeing things at a bigger scale, bigger, I guess, global scale? And the reason I'm asking is sometimes you see founders who are like, I've seen this small gap because I used to work this place and I know this is a solution I can bring to market. You're bringing on like a global supply chain solution, which I thought obviously fits with what you've done previously.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think it's a funny analogy. Yeah, we saw this gap and the gap just happened to be because of our background. And, my co-founders also share an interest in large scale global systems that just was not being served. And so we went into it. I'll say, obviously it's a big vision and it's a hard space to get into. So we've had to work really hard to sort of provide the solutions here. I think there are frankly easier things we could have done with our time, but it's extraordinarily rewarding because it's a gap that when you're doing impact and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm helping to stop illicit fentanyl production, or oh my gosh, I'm with Lloyd's of London issuing a new form of helping to issue like a whole new type of analysis that enables new forms of insurance. It's just really, it's a pleasure.
I guess, that absolutely makes sense. And I think it is super interesting, the problems founders tackle. I think their backgrounds sometimes directly correlate. I guess in this case, it does absolutely make sense. When you moved into the space and you start looking at, you obviously had the background in the quantitative side and civil engineering. There's a piece of the rest of the technology you touched on in terms of that general tech knowledge, being able to maybe look at the scale differently from how do you translate these models, how do you actually start solving these bigger problems and filling in some of those tech skills that maybe you kind of just picked up along the way. When you look at that scale, how do you balance the fact that your mind was trained in quantitative political science type background, and then all of a sudden you've got to incorporate some of that technical know-how to make sure it actually works at the scale you want?
Well, I'd just say because of the work and on the modeling side within civil and then in quantitative political science, it wasn't that I came into it and did not, I came into it knowing how to program. I came into it having done analyses, then applying that frankly, at the next level of scale where it's like hundreds of millions or billions of records. I just, frankly, as really lucky to benefit from the mentorship of engineers and other, data scientists who I both have worked with and continue to work with. And also, frankly, I think I really got lucky to work at a small company at the start of my career. I came in and like I said, it was, first data scientist there. And it was like, okay, let's get into it because you've got to both design and then implement your own designs. You're doing a lot of data engineering as well. You're getting code reviews, but it's just every day you're just sort of grinding out, and everyone in such a small company is a key component and you really stretch as a result. So that was really, I think, that sink or swim moment. And then frankly, figuring out that I could swim and then getting that good feedback on my swimming technique, to overstretch the analogy, was really, really key. The other thing I'll say that's been key to my success, and this goes back, I think, to your question about this background in political science, is I think that knowledge of this, not just AI and machine learning, but actually an understanding of the domain you're working in as a data scientist is so key. In other words, having a product sensibility. I obviously have a deep background in global trade and global value chains, but the broader point is that, think about what that means if you actually have such a understanding, or if you don't as a data scientist. If you do, you're talking about you can come up with ideas for products. You're like, oh my gosh, there's this like whole new opportunity to make like a new form of trade finance, or like, oh my gosh, like why don't we go and like, we could help understand this network in this way, and then here's the client need that it would serve. And then when you go to the implementation of that, sort of that mid-level, for me, and I think probably for a lot of people listening to your podcast, understanding the menu of options to work on a technical problem is so, so key. Because, and especially within data science, I believe there's a lot of different techniques to solve a problem, and a lot of different ways it could go right or could go wrong. And there's sort of an understanding of sort of the theory and how the theory relates, what's your bias, like what's your belief on like how you can best solve this problem. And then you go and test that hypothesis and try it. And you're like, oh my gosh, I need a knowledge graph. I'm gonna have to go construct that. Or, oh my gosh, I'm gonna use a recommendation system here. And then if you know the domain, again, you can go down to the next level and actually assess the quality of the results. I think there's a lot of ways to have a beautiful test set and sort of still with that test set achieve high results and produce something that's not fit for purpose. And instead, if you can know the domain and like be like, okay, I'm just like jamming away at this and trying and looking at the results and have that product sensibility, you can be like, I don't need a product person to tell me there's something wrong here. I got to go fix it myself. Or, oh my gosh, this is great. Even if like it's failing in some cases, those cases, the model's actually doing better. The test set's wrong, and you can sort of make that judgment. So across that stack, then what I would really highlight, which is for me, like my background and then working within the space of global supply chain and global trade, has been so key to doing good data science and good engineering and good architecture work, But the analogy, I believe, extends to all fields.
And you talked about that, obviously, the sink or swim with your job at Penjiva being the first data science hired. You got good signals that you're on the right track. And obviously, you moved into a leadership role there. I guess from the IC perspective, you kind of walked us through that transition. As you move into management, and obviously that seems to be your first head of data science role, you've been there for a few years. In terms of that management style and kind of how you picked up leadership skills, right? I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people when they make that transition, and that leadership skill gap is really key. Is how have they been mentored? How have they approached building those skills? Because once you get there, you're expected to have some of those tools while you're being supported. From your perspective, as you make that transition, how did it go for you?
Honestly, man, I would say it's never easy if you're doing it right. You got to have grit because it's never easy. And there's some things that you can teach or read about, but there's a lot of things you can't. It's funny. I was rereading Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things the other day. And I was just thinking to myself, I read this before I did these things, but I mean, he wrote the book with the thesis that like, here's the things no one teaches you about in these sort of management books, the tough things. But it's like, even reading it before I went through the tough things, I'm not sure I really got the lesson. So it's almost more like a book where I'm like, yeah, been there, rather than like, oh, like, I'm not sure I picked up as much as I would have hoped earlier before I went through it. I'm so grateful, I'll just say, to sort of my co-founders. They themselves had a deep experience in running companies and brought that. They'd already done that, and in management. Mentors and advisors who helped me through tough decisions. It's never easy, and I've really benefited from a diverse set of mentors over the years. That's so helpful. Friends also, frankly, just like that you can bounce decisions off of, because being in management can be more isolating, right? Like it is a transition from being an IC. Executive coaching has been great. I highly recommend it. But to go back to this earlier point, it's just, sink or swim or doing. There's, in some ways, maybe there's a better substitute for it, but I'm sorry to your listeners, I don't know it. It's like some things you only learn by doing and by some tough lessons. So I've been grateful for everyone who's born with me through those tough lessons, and I've been grateful for the support, but it's been a fantastic journey of self-knowledge, and I frankly wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yes, I mean, I think I think a lot of people do learn from sink or swim. They have to know what not to do so that they can try to find just a different thing to do. I think a lot of times that is just the way we learn, and it does make a sense. The mentorship you mentioned, executive coaching, and obviously, being a head of data science and then moving into being a co-founder of your own company, being a CTO. Those are different skills still, and obviously different aspects that you didn't have to maybe deal with as a head of data science. As you kind of keep layering those skills, that co-founder hat, and having to kind of discover more of who you are, maybe talk to us a little bit about that process of understanding and kind of refining, understanding where you excel, and understanding how you picked up some of those other founder skills that maybe you hadn't had an opportunity to work on when you were at Penjiva.
100%. And I think just to sort of talk a little bit about what the experience of starting a company and being a founder is I think it's a very naked experience, in the sense that, like, you've said you're going to go do a thing and you're going to go do it, hopefully with some other co-founders, but it's like, it's just, you're not sort of insulated from the world in the way that you might have been previously. You've got to go raise the money. You've got to go start it up. You're responsible for the success. And what this really forces is a lot of reflection upon yourself and knowing yourself. And, to one thing that I, would definitely add to that list of working on leadership skills is just doing the self-work to know yourself, and also then getting a lot of feedback on like what you're good at and what you're not. Like, you need to understand that, and this goes beyond just founders, this is just in general, the success of the organization you're in will be your success, especially if you're in a company in which you have equity, and that you really have to understand and work upon what are you good at and what are you not. So just to go directly to sort of this experience that I had where, we started the company as chief technology officer, we're growing it out. And, through a lot of reflection and a lot of conversations, I realized that I just had not built something at the scale that this was starting to be. And like it really was important to have someone who had built out an organization and something of that scale. And we've been, very blessed and honored to have Ian Kajou, who came on as our CTO, as I sort of made that transition. And working with him has been a tremendous pleasure. And, he came to us from Bridgewater, where he built out large scale teams and systems. And I digress, but the financial world actually produces a lot of people that have worked on similar questions of modeling and acting upon the world, just in a different space. And so, he came in with an intuitive understanding of some of the dynamics. And then, to go back to sort of what I'm good at, sort of, like you think to yourself, where is my skill set? How am I going to help the company grow? And it really was those things we referred to earlier, which was that understanding of the technology around AI and machine learning, and then of the domain, and then fusing those together, which often looks like, thinking about product as well, and working then on those topics. And so then as chief science officer, what am I doing fundamentally? I've built out a lot of the earlier production systems with the team, of course. So with the team, built out a lot of those earlier production systems, but then additionally now get to work on sort of pushing the art of the possible, working on prototypes. So I've recently been working on measuring carbon emissions at scale in the systems and how you would optimize production of goods, or even measure and then mitigate those emissions across global value chains. And that's been a tremendous pleasure. So that's sort of been the journey. And, I just, not to be too pithy about it, but look, I've tried winning and I've tried losing. I prefer winning. And, when like, you got to know yourself to win. And so we still got to, like, we are an actively evolving company. We've got a ton of work to do. I'm so grateful for this personal evolution that's come with it.
I love that. And maybe just to, you said you like the erring the side of trying to win, not lose. And maybe talk to us a little bit about that, because I think somebody will hear that and be like, well, I don't know if I see the difference between knowing I'm winning versus losing, because sometimes the battle is really hard to see the trees of the forest. But also, yeah, obviously, this is in relation to knowing yourself and knowing there's certain qualities that put you in that position. So I was just kind of curious if you kind of expand on that example you're giving us.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, just to be really clear, when I say winning, I mean the organization winning. I don't mean personally, like you win. And the broader point of that is like, as a leader, the organization winning will be your win. And that's sort of that's easy to say. That's hard to internalize until you've sort of really, I think, been through some self-growth. But it's like, what do I want and what do we all want? We want Altana to be tremendously successful, to have massive impact, and to, be a great experience for everyone who's there and for our clients. And so, like, when we think about what that means fundamentally, is like, you have to understand how you fit in a growing organization. And a key point is that, like, you can have an organization that's growing quickly, like extremely quickly, like imagine a tech company in the phase of like a scale up, right? We're in growth mode here, and you can be growing, but not growing at the scale of like, exponential scale of a growing company. So like, you might be like, oh my gosh, like I'm, like my role is changing, like, or like, oh my gosh, like I'm getting layered. But it's like, no, dude, you're totally advancing at a successful company. It's just that you can't expect that your ability to incorporate new things will grow exponentially, like at the scale that the company can. And so that enlightened self-interest and understanding that will lead you to success in your work, but you really do have to sort of have that, I would say, ego death, and then enlightened self-interest, and understand what it means to succeed truly, not what it feels like in the moment.
Absolutely. No, obviously, as a founder, company success, I mean, obviously that means you're personally succeeding directly and indirectly.
Oh, but sorry, just add one thing there. I would say it's not just company founder, because like, it's really about being a leader, or frankly, just being anyone there, and just being an IC. It's like, especially at a startup, like if you're like, wow, I was engineer number 3 at like Google, right? Like, people don't care what your title, like no one looks back on your title and is like, oh yeah, you that's great. That guy, that gal, right? Like, that's what people are seeing. And like, just like, it's easy to get lost and not see that, but that's the reality of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think Gary Vaynerchuk talks a lot about being employee 15 at a startup might be better than you being a founder. And I think really what he's trying to tell people is there's a lot of conversation around being an entrepreneur, having a side gig, being a founder, being that's super, moved into the limelight in society in the last 5, 10 years. And I think what you've been saying, and I think kind of fits a little bit of what he said, is if you know yourself, if you know your attributes and you focus on those potentially, and you really concentrate on knowing what those are, it might propel you further, whatever the role is. As you just said, with your founder, your employee number 3, the success will come. Do you kind of subscribe to the fact that actually, I'll let you answer it. You have a couple of options here. You know your strengths and double down on them. Or some people go, you know what? I really want to focus on my weaknesses because I want to shore up what I'm not good at. And it's interesting because I don't think either path is wrong, but there are distinct decisions made along the way of how you capitalize on those skills.
Honestly, I think it varies a little bit based around a person's personal ambition and character. There's some roles which being like really good at one thing is what is going to drive you, and there's other roles where you do need to be more well-rounded. So the first role might be like a scientist who's a specialist in like agriculture. It's like, okay, like, do you really need to be working on like your sort of social media posting skills? Like, I mean, I don't know agriculture that well, but I don't think so. And it's like, versus if you're like, oh no, you're going to be like a manager, an executive at a company where you might need a wide variety of skills. All that said, I would say that maybe the framework to think about is, and I'm stealing this actually from a graduation speech I saw years ago, but it's like, think about like what you enjoy in a day-to-day manner. And obviously not everything you do in your professional career in your life will be that thing you enjoy. But if you can be doing things that sort of are fundamentally it's not what the title is. It's not what like, it's not what it's called. It's like in the moment, are you in flow? Are you enjoying it? Or like, is it stretching you? Do more of that if you can. And the reason that you should do more of that is that like, you're likely to get much, much better at it because you enjoy it. It'll just be this sort of self-propelling loop. Like I love the work on, AI, machine learning, engineering in global value chains. It's so interesting to me. It's going to be something totally different for someone else. But like, if you find that thing, it'll just put you into self-propelling loop where you're reading about it, you're thinking about it, you're having good success. And even if you're not as successful as you hoped, at least you're doing something you love. And so like, that is what I would really stress. And then just to be a little more tactical on this, if there are weaknesses that are like, you do need to think about weaknesses. I want to make this point really, really clear. Like, it's not enough to be like, just like really good at one thing and then just be super rude and like, or like, you're neglecting your communication skills. No one can understand what the heck you're going on about, right? So just get that feedback from your peers, from your friends, ask for that direct feedback, take it in a constructive manner. These things are totally, you can work upon it, you can make it better. Like, I think people can define themselves in a way that is just too limiting, and like a growth mindset, like, you can learn to dance. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, I'm not saying you're gonna be a world-class dancer, but you can learn to dance at an acceptable level. And that is the analogy for like, I think a lot of skills that people are like, oh, I'm not good at that thing. It's like, no, if it's holding you back, fix it.
I love it. I appreciate it. I know you got to actually get back to the job, so I will thank you for your time. I'll thank you for your insights. I think it's been a fascinating episode, diving into your background in Altana and a lot of interesting career guidance as well. If someone's going to want to just ask you a follow-up or learn a little bit more about Altana, what's a good way of doing that?
I think the best way to get in touch with us is, you can definitely go to our website, altana.ai, and we are hiring. Also, please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. We'll put the link in the show notes, as well as just Altana. And even if you're not interested in what we do, I'll just note we have a ton of interesting just blogs, and just as you think about complex systems and understanding things at scale, you may gain analogy for whatever space you're interested in. You may find the analogy to whatever space you're interested in.
So, Peter, I know you've got a really, interesting background. Obviously, have gone through a journey to get into a chief science officer role, and obviously, when you have that kind of diversity in your background, it does tend to shape, how you view leadership and just your views on leadership in general. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that.
So, certainly my background informs my leadership views, and I'm an optimistic, although realist person. And I would say I've actually had a journey that's been I think, the opposite of a lot of people's, and that I've become less cynical over time and become more optimistic and positive. I grew up in DC, as no strangers to some of the, difficulties or harshness of the world. But I found that by working on real challenges, working on hard things, you can really make an impact. And certainly, we do at Altana, we've talked about this here, but it's like you're actively building out production systems that can produce more material prosperity while at the same time stopping exploitation of humans, building out resiliency, and actually targeting illicit activity like fentanyl production. Like, it's an enormous impact, and we see that in our work. It's not theoretical. And when you're doing that and you're also aligned with the people you're working with, you're creating a good culture, a place to be, and it's empowering. It's really win-win, and it makes you optimistic on the world. And I would say that from a leadership point of view, and frankly, I think everyone can be a leader in this, I would say that tech needs to focus on solving difficult problems with clear benefits. We should focus on deep problems in science, technology, industry, society. We're at this golden age right now. In fact, I think just the start of a golden age of distributed intelligence, the ability to have AI to help us with these things. But it's high performance computing, it's all the advances we're all so familiar with. We can confront previously intractable problems in medicine, in industrial production, in national defense, in human rights, fundamental science and mathematics. I could go on, but like things that are all examples of worthy pursuits and have very obvious benefits. And I would contrast that, we see so much talent go into applications that are generally neutral or in some cases negative for society. And what I would say to your listeners is, at the end of your life, you have to ask yourself, what have you done with that time? And while not being blind to the realities of this life, I think we can and we must unify around producing a better and safer world through hard work and human ingenuity. And in our experience, that is very doable. You can do it. You can make an impact. And I would encourage all the listeners to do the same.
I spoke to somebody recently, and we started talking about when we're looking at these advanced technologies, generative AI technologies, machine learning, context has a very different meaning, and having a different lens to look at the actual problem without worrying about the technical solution, without worrying about how the solution will be developed is not always the easiest thing for technologists. When you look at that context lens, obviously having the background you do you see things differently with that in mind?
Absolutely. And I think I see it in two different ways. I talked a lot about the impact and the positive impact one can have. I think it's also, frankly, an opportunity. It's like so much of the easy problems have already been solved. And when you go attack those harder problems, it's just, there's more opportunity because you're going to go, in some ways, what we do at Altana sounds kind of insane. It's like, we're going to revolutionize value chains in the production of physical goods. But we're having tremendous success with it. And because we've set out for this ambitious goal, we have a massive opportunity. And so I would say by limiting oneself and focusing on smaller goals, you also don't have those big opportunities. And so I really would say that perspective has been important to me, but I think it's available to anyone. It's from looking at first principles at what's happening in the world and what's happening in science and what's happening in machine learning and technology and saying, how can I get involved with that?
Peter, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. I'll be back in with a different guest, different episode. Until then, two things. One, I thought this was a great episode. We talked about Peter's background, obviously coming from a quantitative political science background, civil engineer, moving in through data science, being a co-founder, a leader. He's talked about that growth mindset, his love of global value chain systems, and how that's really been a continuous concept and all the way through his career. It's really interesting to watch somebody actually find something they love, embrace it, and kind of progress with it. Share this with somebody else. I thought it was a great conversation on helping people find that passion. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.